Welcome, seja bem-vinda, Judy. Greetings.
Obrigada.
I'm Margie Buttitta. I'm happy to be with you today on February 13th, 2017 at our Louisville Convent in Woodland Hills, California. And we're all looking forward to chatting with you. You are a real California girl, born in Culver City. So it must have been easier, a little easier, for you to meet up with the Sisters of St. Louis, who in the past were working in about 13 different parish schools. Tell us where and when you actually met a Sister of St. Louis.
Well, my first introduction to the Sisters of St. Louis came through high school because I went to Mater Dei High School in Santa Ana, and it's an archdiocesan high school. There were 7 congregations of sisters teaching there at that time, and there were a number of other priests and brothers and lay teachers as well. And the Sisters of St. Louis were one of those congregations that were teaching there. I had various St. Louis to teach me, mostly in English and in music. So I would have had Sister Amon, Mary Rice, Sister Bridget Claire McKeever, she was Sister Wilfred at that time, Sister Thomas Moore, Nuala Ryan, Sister Vianney, Angela Finan, Sister Mary of the Sacred Heart, Miriam Drum, and Sister Siobhan, Una Connolly. So there were a number of the sisters that way. There was another one, Sister Keeving. I think she was Aideen Meany. And so all of those were at some time in my time in Mater Dei. And actually, whenever I was a senior in Mater Dei, my sister was going to the Irvine, and so we were sharing a car, and I used to go to their house after school and wait for her to pick me up about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. So I got to knowing the Sisters of St. Louis pretty well at that time.
And some of those sisters are actually here at Louisville in the same living convent that you are in right now. Sister Claire and Una Connolly.
And Nuala.
And Nuala, that's right.
Yes, they are, and so it gives me a little bit of an advantage point because I'm their prodigy, you know.
Did you also go to Catholic grade school?
I did. I went to Blessed Sacrament grade school in Westminster.
And those were sisters of?
St. Columban.
Okay, so the St. Louis won over the Columban sisters.
Well, that's another story. That's I actually wanted to enter. I wanted to be a missionary, and I wanted to enter the Columban sisters. From about 6th grade, I knew that I wanted to be a religious. And so the Columban sisters were the ones who were teaching me at that time, and they were the ones who had instilled a missionary spirit in me. I planned to enter with them, but when I wrote to them and asked about that, they asked me to wait a year. And I mean, you know, you didn't ask me to wait a year at 18 years old whenever I was ready to move forward. And so I decided, no, I'll go someplace else.
Very
so
good.
I went to the St. Louis instead.
And that was wonderful for the Sisters of St. Louis and for all of us. So that actually prompted you then to enter the community, being that they were going to accept you right away. You had known some of the sisters. And do you have any good memories or about highlights of those first days of entrance and the life in the convent here in Woodland Hills?
I remember, well, I was with Sister Donna. She was one of the ones who had come from Louisville High School here. And so she was in my set. And it was fascinating because she was going around meeting everybody and greeting everybody and welcoming everybody, you know. I remember the times whenever we would have visiting Sundays and families would come up, and we'd have it all down in St. Louis Hall, and everyone have a table with their families. And so we got to knowing a few of the other families and things like that at the time. There were, there's a lot of different things that's a long time ago. That's 50 years ago at this point.
Good memories. Yes, this is your Jubilee year.
Yes,
so you will be celebrating in October your 50 years Jubilee.
I also remember that our particular set, we had a lot of people there who were musical. And I mean, for me, that was one of the reasons why I entered the St. Louis. I loved their musical expertise. I said a very holy reason, you know. knew nothing about charism or any of those things at that time, but what it was that attracted me to the St. Louis over some of the other congregations was the musical expertise and my love for music. And so I remember that as postulants and novices, we used to put on musicals, and we would write a song for each of the sisters whose feast day it was, and put the song to music of another song and perform it for them. And we did all kinds of things of that sort, and all of us learned how to do Irish dancing and, you name it.
Yes, it's a shame we don't have CDs or videos of some of those songs and productions, because I remember them too. They were very good memories of the novitiate. Of course, there were hard times as well, but as we can see, God's providential care was all along on your side, guiding you to what He wants you to do or to be. And then you, for about 10 years, you taught, when you finished the novitiate, you taught elementary schools, and also had time for college. Anything you remember about those elementary school teachings or experiences? You did want to be a missionary, so were you able to take those years as good experience, waiting patiently and hopefully for someday being the missionary you had aspired to be?
They were, and it was a great time for me to begin to develop self-confidence and to learn how to communicate and to teach. I taught 3 years in St. Mel's in second grade, and I had a wonderful mentor at that time. Sister Miguel was my mentor.
Yes.
And so I really learned how to take on a classroom at that stage. We had about 45 in the room at that time. I think those classes are much, much smaller nowadays, but it was an amazing time, really. I taught those 3 years, and one of my second graders at that time is currently a teacher in the high school here.
Oh,
so
that's wonderful.
When I came back here in leadership at first, she came to me and she said, "I think you taught me in second grade." And she brought me a picture of her first communion. So it was true. I did teach her in second grade at that time. Then I taught for 2 years in Our Lady of Refuge in Long Beach, and went from second grade to fifth grade. And then in St. Bede's for 2 years, I went to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So it gave me a broad expanse of experience in terms of age levels and ways to teach and all the rest. So.
And the actual Brazil mission began in 1976, but you were not sent to the mission right away that year, but you did volunteer for the mission, and eventually in 1979 you traveled to Brazil to join the 3 pioneer sisters, Catherine Foley, Maura Clerkin, and myself, Margie, in the interior of the country, the tiny little town of Barrolândia. That must have been an adventure. Initially, like all of us, you studied the Portuguese language in the famous language school called Senfi. Would you like to translate that, Senfi?
Centro de Formação Intercultural.
And now in English?
The Center of Intercultural Formation.
Right. Very good. And that was in Brasilia, the capital of the country. Tell us some of the challenges and highlights of this time in your life, getting to Brazil, doing the language school, seeing where and how you were going to minister, maybe up in the interior, which was like the boondocks at that time. What are some of the highlights of that time?
Oh, there's lots of them. When I was getting ready to go, I was concerned that I wouldn't be able to learn the language. I was worried that I wouldn't tolerate the climate there, 6 months of hot and wet and 6 months of hot and dry. And I was concerned that I wouldn't adapt to the culture. But I still heard that inner voice where God is saying, "I want you," and that desire that I had always had. So since I was the first one to join you 3 pioneers, one of the first challenges I faced was trying to accommodate all the things that I was asked to bring down with me. Such as a toaster oven, a sewing machine. It was like bringing coals to Newcastle. I was listening to the wrong advising voice at that particular time, but I brought down what I was asked to, and I'm not sure where they all ended up. But the electricity, of course, is a different voltage down there, and so these electrical things just don't work in a place like where we were.
I agree with you. They were not things I would have asked for, but it happened, and
Exactly.
yes, we can laugh about it now.
And we do. I mean, we laugh about it at this point. Portuguese was a difficult language, and yet I feel like I picked it up pretty easily and pretty well. Within about 2.5 years, I was dreaming in Portuguese, and so I knew that meant that I really had the language at that point.
Had you had any Spanish, Latin, or French?
I had 5 years of Latin,
Okay, well, that
and I had
helped.
2 years of Spanish.
Yes. Okay.
So it did help, yes.
Yeah.
I expected things to be simple and difficult and transformative, and they were. I remember my first 14-hour trip north on the bus from Goiânia to Barrolandia, and I saw the grass huts along the side of the road, and I thought they were probably shelters for animals. Discovered later on that they were actually the houses that people lived in.
Yes.
One of the biggest things that stands out in my mind was my first trip back to the United States. I expected culture shock when I went down, but I did not expect the culture shock when I came back for my first
Yes.
visit after 3 years. I was overwhelmed by the number of choices that I had to make before breakfast in the morning time.
Right. Yes.
Just because of the overabundance that we have, and we don't even realize what we have or what we do to ourselves. I remember one of those first mornings. What do you want for breakfast? Do you want toast or cereal? Toast. Do you want wheat bread, white bread, muffin, or bagel? Wheat bread. Do you want butter or margarine? Try margarine. Do you want jam or marmalade? What kind of marmalade would you like? Thin cut or thick cut, or orange or lemon? So it just blew my mind. I ended up thinking, forget breakfast altogether. You know, I was used now to this simple life, and I suddenly didn't feel hungry anymore. I said, you know, it really had turned my life upside down and given me a different priority, looking at what is the difference between needs and wants.
Yes, and we're going to talk about some of your maybe cultural shock when we talk about your ministries, your beginning ministries in your 14 years in Brazil. Your college education, what did you study in college? What were you actually using as a major, minor?
English major, music minor, and then I did my credential in teaching.
Okay.
Mhm.
So the ministries that actually came about in your 14 years of Brazil were a little bit different, but they probably did, it did help that you had the English. Could you talk a little bit about your beginning ministries when you were in Brazil?
Well, one of the things I did, I was a teacher in Brazil, in Barrolandia and in Colmeia and in Goiânia, and I taught English as a second language, religion, because religion, even though these were public schools, religion was on the curriculum, basically a general Christian religion was what was on the curriculum. And I also taught teacher training courses, particularly in Colmeia. And in Colmeia, it was morning sessions and night sessions. In the morning, they had the younger students well, there were 3 sessions, but I only taught 2 of them, the morning and the night. I didn't do the afternoon ones. In the morning, we had like 5th to 8th grade, and at night, the adults who had been working all day. And at nighttime, the classes would end just in time for you to get home before the generator went out.
That's
because of this. The electricity would go out at 11:30. We got out of classes at 11 o'clock. So you know, hit the road as soon as possible, walking, of course.
Yeah. And like the 3 beginning pioneers, we really thought we were going into more pastoral church work and not actually teaching, and never thought we'd be teaching in some of the elementary schools. So how was that with you? when you slid into that ministry of teaching, because along with that, you also had the parish.
I
and the
was just
church
going to say,
functions.
we did get the pastoral work as well. We got the parish, the vigaria of the parish, or the parish priestess, as I would like to call it. And for me, the teaching was comfortable because I knew how. And I mean, some of the things, of course, that happened during the teaching were hilarious. Like the time that I caught some students cheating on a test, and I've said, you know, it's like stealing something that's not yours. And he looked at me and he said, "No, sister, it's not stealing, because she's still got it." And so, you know, that kind of a thing, the whole different philosophy of how people thought was fascinating to me.
But the language, learning the language in language school is one thing. Learning the language in a teaching position was even better.
Yes, yes.
So it helped in the pastoral work as well.
So, I mean, I didn't find a conflict with doing the teaching and the parish ministry at the same time. I loved the parish ministry. It was Sunday celebrations without the priest, and letters weekly out to the basic Christian communities on the farms, and you got out to visit them maybe twice a year. Baptisms and marriages and burials and anointing of the sick. And of course, I'm watching you laugh there and remembering
Yes.
Eustachio.
Yes. You have to tell the story of Eustachio, because if I tell it, I'll laugh too much.
Well, we didn't have a car in Colmea for the first 3 years. Well, probably the whole time
First
we were
3
there.
years.
First
no,
3
first
years
3 years.
that we were there. And so we would get out to the farms on whatever means we could, either somebody who was going out, or the milk truck, or any other means. And we would also depend on being able to get back from the farm. So I went out to one of the farming communities on one of the days. I think I went out by milk truck that morning. And then when it came time to go back, the owner of the area, or the one who took care of the land, said that we were going to go by horseback as far as another farm where they had a car, and that I would get the car then, and we would drive the rest of the way back. But halfway back on horseback, we heard the car leaving, because you can hear great distances in the middle of the silence and the middle of the interior, as we called it there. And so the car left, and we ended up coming back all the way on horseback.
Now you have to paint the picture. We are talking about you, a white American, pale at this point, in a skirt, and Eustachio had much of the Afro-Brasileira blood, so he was quite dark. So that's the funny part. And you weren't on the same horse. You were on two
different horses.
But you had a hard time with your skirt getting on the horse.
Yes. Well, I had on, it wasn't just a skirt, it was a dress. And it was a fairly straight dress, because I hadn't anticipated coming back by horse. And so the ladies on the farm had the men turn their back, and I hiked up the skirt, got onto the horse, and they wrapped a sheet around me so that I could modestly ride back.
More white. So
yes.
My vision of you coming was this vision of a white, I think the horse was even white.
Yes, I was on the white horse, but it was blind in one eye. And
It
didn't
was
really want to
very,
cross the
very
stream
funny.
when we got there. There were a few little things like that, that we have wonderful memories.
And you had to come through the town, so a lot of people saw you on this.
Yes, and it was a full moon that night.
Yes.
Eustachio was on a black horse, and so the two of us came, and he philosophized and sang and all that, all the way. I don't know what time we actually arrived back in Colmea, but it was after the lights had gone
quite dark,
out.
and we were quite worried, and our black German Shepherd dog could hear you coming from a distance.
Yes.
And went into a lot of barking and frantic mode, and I had to lock the dog in one of the rooms because she just got so upset.
Yes.
That somebody was following you on the horse. So that was a very funny, very, very funny experience. And there are many like it.
Oh,
Many,
yes.
Many like it.
Many, many like it.
Would you like to say anything about the Brazilian people? And I know you talked about some
Well,
of
let
your
me tell you some
students.
more of the ministries that I did
Oh,
while I was
yes,
down there.
yes.
I wasn't just a teacher and the vigaria for a good while, but we also opened a health post in
Right.
Barcalangia while I was there. And at the time that I went down, Sister Maureen Smith went down. That was the first time that they opened the mission. You first three all came from California. And then during
Right.
those years, they opened it to anyone else or other regions of the Institute. So Sister Maureen Smith came from Ireland, and she and I studied in the language school together, but she was a nurse. And so we opened a health post. But after 5 years, she got cancer, was diagnosed with cancer, and she went back to Ireland in September and died the following February. And so the health post was left without a coordinator. We had 2 Brazilian ladies who were...
That she had trained.
That she had trained, yes, who were working in the health post, but we received medicines from Trocra and Miserior and some of these places in Ireland, Advania, maybe, I'm not even sure which of the places sent it, but they would send medicines, and so I ended up translating medicines and how to use them from
that's
English into Portuguese for the ladies in the health post to be able to use. So it was really fascinating to say, okay, here I am running a health post, and I'm definitely not a nurse, but but it was another one of those experiences.
Missionaries have to be ready for everything.
Exactly.
And anything.
And then I became the formation directress.
That's
And
right.
later on, I remember teaching guitar down there. And yes, I played guitar, but some of my students who came in by horseback to come and have a lesson passed me out in no time in terms of their talent and their expertise. I often wonder whatever happened to them.
And they wouldn't have had any music background
No.
study. Just when we're talking about music, is there anything, you are a good singer, and you did do a lot of music in Brazil, and help in the church too, teaching the songs to the parish people, the little communities. Is there a few songs you'd like to, maybe just the refrain of one or two?
I can try, but my voice isn't great these days. It's
I know, you've had a little vocal problem.
Yes. One of the ones that when Elenise comes up, she always wants to sing with me.
Elenise is our Brazilian vocation.
That's right.
Who is in Brazil as well, still.
Minha alma engrandece, ó Deus meu Senhor, meu espírito se alegra no meu Salvador, meu espírito se alegra no meu Salvador.
Beautiful, yes, it is beautiful. And Elenise has a gorgeous voice, so the two of you together are very nice. Let's lighten it up now. What was one of our favorite songs during Senfi, the language school?
Todas pensam que cachaça é água, cachaça não é água não. Cachaça vem do Alabique e água vem do Ribeirão.
Maybe we can translate that a little bit now.
Oh, I think that we shouldn't translate that one.
Well, cachaça is the Brazilian tequila.
Yes.
The alcohol drink. And it's,
And so it's saying that everyone thinks that tequila is water, but tequila is not water. Tequila comes from
still,
and
Yeah.
water comes from the river.
It was one of our favorite songs, and we did a lot of singing in Senfi. They were very,
Yes.
very nice.
Oh,
very good
yes.
songs. And the Senfi group too, going back again to the language school, it was an exciting time too. You had different cultures and many, many missionaries, both women, religious, priests, brothers, lay people. How did you enjoy your Senfi times?
I enjoyed Senfi pretty well.
Yours was in Brasilia.
It was in Brasilia.
Different than the first.
We got to do a number of things that you would not normally get to do. We actually went to one of the mansions on the far side of the lake and had a private screening of Oscar Romero,
Wow.
before it ever hit the theaters. And so we got to see that, we also, during that time, one of my favorite experiences was when we did the estagio, or the time in a family. And at that stage, one of the place that I went was a family in Goiânia, and it would have been probably about halfway through our course, and we went off for a week. I think it was just a week, or was it 2 weeks?
I think about a week and a half or two.
Okay, and we lived with the family, and the family did not know any English, and so it was an absolute immersion into the style of life. And so I actually had two families, because one of them worked during the daytime, who had room for me to sleep, and the other one then took care of all the kids. And so I had an awful lot of fun with the 7 kids in the family during that week and a half, and trying to make myself understood. It was a difficult time, but it was a wonderful experience as well.
You have to almost become a child again
You do?
when
Oh,
you're
yes.
learning a new language and a new culture. We could talk for a long time about so many experiences that you had in your
Yes.
years in
Mhm.
Brazil. Is there anything else that we'd just like to highlight before we move on a little to your next phase in life?
No, I think that the rest of it will come together. I mean, I probably had about 4 or 5 other experiences that I would say, Margie, do you remember this? And just
And they're good memories.
And they're good memories, yes. There are many good memories. I suppose that one of the things that I would like to highlight, though, as well, is that so often we ran into situations where we would love to be able to resolve them or to help out, and there was absolutely nothing that we could do except to be a presence and a hope to the people. And so it taught me how to stand with people in their suffering, and stand with people in listening to how joyful they can be, and what signs of joy that they can be in the midst of some really destitute situations. I also remember the extreme support that we received from the religious of other communities there, as well as from the priests who were in the area. And, when you think about a place the size of the Republic of Ireland with only 7 priests to attend it, you can understand why we ended up being the parish priestess in the various places, trying to attend to the people in all of the different areas that they needed attention, or that they loved. I also loved the fact that we tried to work ourselves out of a job in
Yes.
those places, and trained the people to be able to take over. And in Colmea, we were in Barranlandia longer, but in Colmea, we were able to do it faster.
Yes,
And it was because of the background that the people had.
yes.
So,
And now, reflecting when we read our chapter documents the last several years and reflect on our charism and the model of St. Louis and Louis Vuitton and his motto of God wills it, and that they may be one, we can definitely look back at some of the experiences in our Brazil missionary life that really were predecessors to that, to those, because at the time in our novitiate we didn't necessarily study a lot of those charisms. It came out after, and going back to our foundation, going back to our founders. So do you see anything in our motto, in our charism, that you can reflect back, like you just said, working ourselves out of a job, not being able to do anything but be a presence, a hope? Is there anything else you would like to maybe dwell on in that regard?
I think that the oneness, the intercongregational experience there, the unity that we found in seeing that we're not so different after all, that all of us are one, that we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, and that, we're all one family. And so that idea of unity, and the idea of the solidarity with the marginalized and the poor, even the black ring that so many of us come back wearing, it comes from tukum, from a type of a coconut, a little coconut seed or shell that is made, and it signifies the
Indians.
preferential option for the poor. Even the bishop in Brazil at the time that we were there, that was his episcopal ring. And so that preferential option for the poor, which doesn't mean, no, we want everybody to be poor, but it means that we all deserve to be equal. We all deserve to be seen in the same plane. That the radical difference between the poor and the rich is not right. That it is one of those social sins that goes on. So
Yes.
that all of those things I became much more aware of and much more immersed in during the time that I was in Brazil.
Yes, it's a richness, those missionary years, and it's wonderful to reflect back and to connect
Mhm.
the dots between where we are today and what we're reflecting on and going back to in our history as Sisters of St. Louis and our experiences.
Mhm.
It does give a wonderful richness. And then let's just change things a little bit, because in 1993 you began a well-deserved sabbatical at the
Mhm.
Institute for Spiritual Leadership in Chicago, Illinois. And you completed a master's degree in spiritual direction in Loyola University in Chicago, Illinois. How were those experiences in ministry that followed in the Archdiocese of Chicago? How did they all go? And did you miss Brazil? What made you desire a change or a need for a sabbatical, and coming away from those experiences you had those 14 years in Brazil?
Well, there came a time in Brazil whenever I felt like I was getting in a rut, where I didn't feel like I had anything new to offer, and I felt like I needed something, a shot in the arm, or something to help me out. And so that's when I came up to do the sabbatical. What spurred me into doing the spiritual direction is that there had Bill Barry, the Jesuit who has written a number of books on spiritual direction, visited Brazil a few times and gave short courses there. And I did 2 of the courses with him. And so he encouraged me to pursue spiritual direction at that time. And
You were in Goiânia at that time.
I probably was.
Yes.
So I can't even remember where I was at that. Some of those years kind of flowed together, So whenever I went to Chicago, I had every intention of returning to Brazil after the sabbatical was over. But this was another time whenever God turned my life upside down. And the spiritual direction training course that I did approached spiritual direction through working on my own stuff. Each of us working on our own history and delving into our own spirituality to find the stuff of spiritual direction. It was a deepening that relationship with God by seeing everything that happened to us and with us in that light, in the fact that all of it is part of God's history with me. So whenever I was doing that, it brought me to surface and work on personal issues that a year in a course didn't have enough time to process and accept and own and heal and all of those things. So when it came time to go back to Brazil, or whenever the course was over and I was looking at what happens now, I just knew that it wasn't time for me to go back and stay in Brazil, that I would be running away from this and escaping it back into an area where I would get immersed in all kinds of other things and just stuff it, in other words. And so I went back to Brazil for a short time just to kind of tie up some loose ends. And I didn't disconnect with Brazil totally at that time. I stayed linked up with it for another probably 3 or 4 years, and only switched back to the California region quite a few years later. It's one of those things that it wasn't easy, but I knew it was right. And whenever I came back from Brazil that time, and I needed to look for a job and look for a place to stay, that all fell into place within 1 or 2 weeks.
A sure sign of God's providence.
Exactly. And so that just confirmed that what I was doing at that time was what was right for me to do. So I began working at the Office for Catechesis and Youth Ministry of the Archdiocese of Chicago.
And they were richer for it.
And I started there as a vicariate catechetical coordinator, because the diocese is divided into 6 vicariates there, with a bishop in charge of each one of them. And each vicariate has between 35 and 50 parishes in it. So I was accompanying the catechetical leaders and the catechists in those, and giving courses on training for catechesis and all that kind of thing. And during that time, I also was the liaison with the publishers of catechetical textbooks. So I got to knowing Sadlier and RCL Benziger and Silver Burdett and Ignatius Press and Loyola Press and Pauline Books and Media and et cetera, et cetera.
A far cry from translating medicines
Exactly.
into Portuguese. But
So then a year later, I was approached and asked to set up a media center or a lending library for catechetical videos and books and all that kind of thing. We had inherited the Mundelein Media Center when Mundelein College and Loyola University merged as one. So it was mostly 16 millimeter films at the time, some slides and some film strips from a long time ago, and a few videos. So my job then was to organize it. We did not use the 16 millimeter films hardly at all during that time. A few of them, yes, but the Parable was one that didn't seem to come out in video, so we used that one. And so I ended up setting up this catechetical media center, organizing it, and I had a wonderful experience with a board that I set up during that time called the Publishers Connection Board. It was a great time when competitors were able to gather together and work with one goal in mind. And so they would come and advise me and help me out in terms of the catechetical media that we were trying to put in there and lend to the parishes. In the process of working with the Media Center, we did transition from videos to DVDs, and then eventually I have a feeling that it has probably since then been dismantled in many ways.
or gone into a database.
Exactly. A few years later, I was asked to be the associate director of the office, so the direct work with the parishes became a little more general. I didn't have a direct work with a specific group of parishes at that time. Instead, I was going around and teaching in all of the different vicariates and areas, and also took on the budgeting and the planning processes and the evaluation and screening of staff. I was the liaison with the director and kept the media center and the Publishers Connection running at that time too. And I also was asked, would I develop and start a Chicago Catechetical Conference. So one of the years, that was my job, to begin the Catechetical Conference. That first year, I think we only had about 4,000 who attended it. But after that, then it began to grow. The first year we held it, the first 2 years we held it in Loyola University, and then we moved to the convention center, Rosemont Convention Center, which is similar to the Anaheim Convention Center.
Right.
The later years, I believe they have moved it out to a place further out in Drury Lane. But it was a fascinating experience. The first couple of years I ran the whole thing, and then after that I started concentrating just on the exhibit hall. And so I got to knowing all kinds of connections in terms of exhibitors that were coming to show their wares and help us out in many different ways. And for 1 year, in the midst of it all, our director took a job with one of the publishers, and so 2 of us were associate directors, and we ran the office for a year. Actually, I think it was only 11 months until we got a new director. My partner's name was Jackie, and so we called ourselves J&J Associates.
Oh, wow. And all this time you were living in an apartment with a sister of another congregation.
Mhm.
So that was a good experience, intercongregational living.
Yes, we lived together for 9 years. Sister Andre Bro was from the Medical Missionaries of Mary, and she had been in Africa for many years, and she the Medical Missionaries of Mary, as you know, are an Irish foundation and predominantly Irish membership as well. So we had something in common there, that me as a St. Louis and she as a Medical Missionary of Mary were Americans in predominantly Irish communities. She had also done the same spiritual direction course a few years prior to me, the Institute for Spiritual Leadership, and we hit it off pretty well. She was a nurse and I was a teacher. She loved to cook and I loved to wash up, and so we made quite a good pair there. And I companioned Andre for the 9 years. We lived together there, and probably, let's see, maybe 4 years before she died, she was diagnosed with a recurrence of cancer. She had had cancer once before. And so I stayed with her until after she had died. It wasn't my first experience of hospice care, but it was my first experience of a prolonged hospice care, because she was in hospice for 9 months. It was a difficult experience, and yet an extremely rich experience, and one that I wouldn't change for anything.
An experience that has great assets right now for you because of your time now. So actually, those about 18 years in Chicago
It was
were
18
very,
years.
very rich, and really gave you a great scope in your life for many, many things. So after those 18 years, you accepted a call to religious leadership in the Los Angeles, California, back to your California roots. And now you are in your second term as a leader in the regional team. How have all your experiences in Brazil and in Chicago contributed to these leadership challenges?
I think that everything intertwines and weaves into a beautiful tapestry, really, whenever we look at the whole. In my early years of teaching in the Los Angeles Archdiocese, before Brazil time, it gave me a love for communicating and reaching the level of the students that I'm talking to or the people that I'm talking with. It gave me a love for transmitting knowledge and understanding, and it gave me a confidence. At that time I was early on, and it gave me a confidence that I could do something, that it started me on the path of listening, and listening to another voice, paying attention to something other than the thoughts that I had already. And then my time in Brazil taught me the difference between wants and needs. It taught me flexibility. It taught me that challenges are invitations rather than obstacles. That there's always another way to figure out how to go about something. It taught me a true compassion for self and for others and for the world and for creation. It got me out of my legalism and shoulds. When I went to Brazil first, I was pretty rigid, black and white and all the rest. And it taught me that there are a lot of shades of gray. Just as one of the Palatine sisters told me when I first went down there, you close one eye and half the other one when you're looking at a situation.
Oh, children,
Yes.
To Italian.
Yes. It gave me a lot of practice of being in front of a crowd or in charge or responsible for the outcome of what was going to happen. And it taught me that presence is often more important than solutions. Then whenever I went to Chicago, I grew a lot in self-knowledge, in understanding how all of life weaves together. I discovered a lot of more self-confidence in high-powered situations, and I had quite a few high-powered situations there. I honed a lot of the listening skills that I had begun to develop, and I came to realize that disagreements are not threats. They're merely invitations to a curiosity about how the other person really thinks and how they perceive things. I put my organizational and financial skills into great use whenever I was in Chicago time, and I found use for a lot of the gifts that God has blessed me with. I learned then also how to stand with another in pain and in suffering and in death, and how to bounce back after that. Then, of course, in 2011, my life turned upside down again, and I accepted the call to return to California in leadership. It wasn't easy, but it felt right, and I don't regret it in any way. It still feels right, and I think that all the experiences that I had up until now have led me to where I am today.
And you still have wonderful Chicago and Brazil connections.
I do, yes, and I keep up with them.
That's very good. And we have to thank your parents, your mom and dad, and your sister and brother, who also contributed a lot to your life. And you were very fortunate to have your father up until just a few years ago. And that was a great blessing. Your mother died when you were in Brazil or in Chicago?
She died in the year 2000, so I was in Chicago at the time.
Yes.
And that means that I was able to get there. I was due to go out to visit her. I had my flight booked for, let's say, a Wednesday, but I got word that she was not doing well, so I went the Saturday before, and she died the following Monday.
They were very, very proud of you. Well, thank you, Judy, for sharing with us today, and we could go on and on because it's unlimited. It has been both enlightening and inspiring to listen to your story, to your experiences, and to your gratefulness to God's providential care. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you,
Gracias, muito obrigada, I should say.
You're mixing your Spanish there.
Spanish. Obrigada, Judy. Que Deus seja muito importante na sua vida. Amém.
Muito obrigada, senhora.